At Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin, they believe better conversations lead to better outcomes. They focus on a holistic financial planning process that starts with where you are right now. They design solutions that fit your specific goals and priorities and that can evolve over time. Wherever you are today, no matter what's next, they'll develop customized recommendations designed to fit your life. Visit their website or call them today. Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin, a better way to money. Head north to a place with deep roots and deeper lakes, where you can speed through a frozen wonderland or glide on a quiet river, where it's so dark you can see the galaxy, the northern lights, and your future all at the same time. It's a place synonymous with up north and Northwoods, a vacation you'll never forget. One word, one place, Minocqua. Plan your getaway today at minocqua.org.
Today on CityCast Madison. Wisconsin State House Democrats and Republicans seem to be finding rare common ground on a historically controversial issue: nuclear power. Is Wisconsin entering its nuclear era? To get the scoop, we sat down with state government reporter at the Cap Times, Andrew Ball. And after the interview, Sandy Botcher will be joining us for a conversation sponsored by Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin about financial planning and their work in the Madison community. So stick around for that to learn more. It's Monday, May 5th. I'm executive producer Haley Sperling, and here's what Madison's talking about. Before we get into our conversation with Andrew, we've got some exciting news for you guys. Y'all know we've been running a membership campaign these past 2 weeks with the goal of welcoming 75 new CityCast Madison neighbors to our squad. And I am so proud to announce that not only did we meet our goal, but y'all, we exceeded it. Thank you. Thank you for making this happen. You guys are the ones who did this, and your support truly means the world to us. It also means that we get to keep bringing you stories from our community that matter to you. I want to give a shout out to some of our new members who just joined the neighborhood. Welcome to Judy G, Jill D, Claire W, Madison T, Christina V, Susan R, Sabrina S, Taryn M, Miley T, Mario G, David Z, Joanna R, Ashley K, Aaron K, and Beth V. Welcome and thank you. I also want to take a minute to recognize the hundreds of CityCast Madison neighbors who have supported us over the years. Y'all are the wind beneath our wings. You are the energy that gets us through the day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you missed this campaign or didn't get a chance to sign up yet, it is not too late. You can still become a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. You guys know our doors are always open. There's always coffee on, and you can sign up for just $10 a month at membership.citycast.fm. All right, now let's power up and get into our conversation about nuclear energy. Andrew, welcome back to CityCast Madison.
Hey, great to be back.
Awesome. So you are here today because I sent you an email saying, want to talk about nukes? And you're a state capitol reporter. That's not something that we normally talk about, but it's because you have a new piece out in the Cap Times titled, "Is Wisconsin Having a Nuclear Energy Moment?" Now, to back up and give folks a little bit of context, nationally, roughly 60% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, while 21% comes from renewable energy, and about 19% comes from nuclear energy. So, Andrew, to put this in the sense of Wisconsin, what does nuclear energy production and usage look like in our state right now?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it is important kind of to understand where we might be going in the future. Wisconsin currently has one nuclear power plant. It's in Two Rivers in the northeast part of the state. And, it used to have a second also kind of up in that same neck of the woods. But I should say that one nuclear plant generates about 16% of Wisconsin's electricity. So 16% comes from nuclear.
So that's not nothing. That's
It's
on
not.
track.
It is a big deal particularly given the interest, kind of like you alluded to, in maybe moving away from fossil fuels. That's kind of part of why we're seeing nuclear, trying to be cool and hip. Is Wisconsin entering its nuclear energy era? Who's to say? But in 2016, so for the longest time, Wisconsin had a ban on building any new nuclear facilities. And in 2016, in a really divisive vote in the state legislature, they opted to remove that policy. So you could build a new nuclear power plant if you wanted to, but no one has as of yet. And we might talk about this a little bit later. There's growing interest in maybe doing something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And, you noted this in your article, but a big part of why we're having this conversation right now is because of our increasing energy usage, much of which, as you noted, comes from powering data centers. And my favorite quote from your story, you said that these data centers, quote, hold servers powering the cat photos being stored in the cloud or the artificial intelligence tool in your web browser.
Yeah, I figured because I have so many pictures of my cat on my phone
Same.
and Google Photos, you have to have the hat tip to that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned this. It's like opinions are really changing on nuclear power. A 2024 Pew Research Center poll showed that overall support for nuclear energy has sort of shifted in recent years. They found that 56% of US adults now support expanding nuclear power in the country. So that's up 13 percentage points from 2020. So, Andrew, do you have thoughts on why these opinions are shifting on nuclear energy? And, again, why we're seeing this in Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I should say, and I didn't make this maybe as explicit in the article as I could have, there are still a lot of people who are anxious about relying heavily on nuclear power for reasons that you can easily imagine. In this country, we had the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster in Pennsylvania, Chernobyl. Everyone has probably seen the post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland movies. That's what people worry about. There also are concerns about the waste generated from nuclear facilities. That's kind of historically been the argument from environmental groups as to why nuclear energy is not quote unquote clean. But that all being said, I think that there are a couple things going on here. One is just the simple reality of climate change and a growing urgency to address that. And I think we've seen some, but not all, environmental groups kind of come to terms with the fact that nuclear is a pretty powerful way of moving away from fossil fuels. And at the same time, I think we're becoming further and further removed from some of the more prominent nuclear disasters of the past. There was the one in the 21st century in Japan that, some of us might remember quite well. But, we're kind of becoming further and further removed from 3 Mile Island, and people have short memories. So I do wonder if that will play a role as well. And then finally, you mentioned the rise in demand. There are only so many ways that we can meet that demand, and I think people are looking at nuclear as a pretty promising way of doing that, particularly when we start talking about some of the new technologies that are emerging.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the arguments that you laid out in your article, too, was that nuclear power, this is something that can be running 24/7, whereas solar and wind can only be running when it's sunny or windy, right?
Yeah. There's this idea of dispatchability, of how available a certain energy source is at any given moment. And that's historically why something like a natural gas plant has been kind of attractive, is you can kind of have a baseline level of production, and then you kind of start layering renewable energy on top of that. But nuclear, there are going to be, I think, as we explore smaller reactors and some of this new technology, even more of an ability to kind of create that baseline, a cleaner energy baseline. And I think that's really attractive, particularly when you start thinking about utilities who value having a predictable source of energy, because it's ultimately their job to keep everyone's lights on.
Sure. And so, Andrew, as I mentioned before, you're a politics reporter, not a science reporter. But, you wrote this article because lawmakers in our state are really making moves around nuclear energy this year. What's been going on in the State House?
Yeah. So there are a couple different things. And what's interesting is, we'll talk about this a bit, it's a bipartisan effort, which we don't always see in the state capitol.
Right. Crazy.
There are a few Republican legislators with some Democrat support have introduced bills to try and make it easier to plan maybe in the future if we want new nuclear facilities, where those might go to really speed up that process. It can take a while, perhaps predictably, to build a nuclear facility. Some folks want to have a nuclear energy summit in Wisconsin to kind of say Wisconsin wants to be a leader in this industry. And also, I think there's a lot of interest in throwing some money at this as well, and particularly thinking about some of the research happening at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and leaning into that. The governor in his budget request wants to kind of change current rules to maybe allow some tax credits, some money to flow for nuclear research. And, the governor was quoted as saying he thinks that this is a promising option. And that puts him on the same side, some very conservative Republicans. And, like I said earlier, that doesn't always happen. And I think that there is, in addition to some of the energy conversations, there's also just like an economic opportunity that people want to take advantage of here, where we're seeing new innovations emerge all the time. We're seeing new innovations come out of UW-Madison. And, I think some people are seeing dollar signs and saying, well, why can't Wisconsin, maybe become a hub for that type of work?
Sure. But I mean, that's not to say, we're going to be having nuclear power plants popping up left and right. We're not projecting that, right?
No, folks shouldn't worry too much about that. I think that, even when we talk a bit about some of those new technologies, those aren't going to really become a reality beyond a lab or, widely on the market for years, if not a decade or two. So we're kind of at the very entry level stages. I guess maybe Wisconsin's nuclear moment will maybe be a few decades long if advocates have their way.
But the era is more than just right now, right? That's why it's an era.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. But it's laying that groundwork so that the state could take advantage of that as we move forward. And there's even some interest. I mentioned earlier we closed one of our nuclear power plants during the 2010s. The federal government said maybe you could bring that back and with some investment use that as a way of generating some power. So definitely moves being made.
Are you ready to cement your reputation as the best gift giver this Mother's Day? Why not give the moms in your life an Aura digital picture frame with preloaded family photos? There are a million reasons to love Aura frames, but let me just share a few. Aura Frames was named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter, and it's easy to see why. There's unlimited storage, so you can add as many photos, videos, and funny memes as your heart's desire. Plus, photos look like real prints with meticulously calibrated high resolution. And it's so simple to set up. Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. For a limited time, listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off, plus free shipping on their best-selling Carver matte frame. That's AURA frames.com. Promo code CityCast. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Governor Tony Evers has come out in support of this, and he's mentioned it as a way to bring clean energy in. And I want to dig into that a little bit because your story noted that lawmakers want to categorize nuclear energy as clean energy. What is the argument behind that?
Yeah, so currently under state law, there's kind of like a bit of a boost given to renewable energy. And the idea is that if you elevate nuclear that same status, it makes it more attractive for investors to come in and sink some money in there. And, that, like I said earlier, kind of historically positioning nuclear as a clean energy source has been a bit controversial for some people. But, the idea is, you could have limitless clean energy and that's kind of the pie in the sky dream. And so facilitating that investment, folks hope, will maybe make it a bit more attractive for utilities and for the folks kind of funding all of this.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about those Benjamins, right? And I guess I should back up too, for context. When I say clean energy, I'm talking about things that don't produce greenhouse gas emissions. But as you have so importantly noted, like there are still remnants and waste that we get from nuclear power. And that is something that folks are concerned about. So, I mean, what are some of the arguments against nuclear power and against it being labeled as clean?
Yeah, it centers a lot on, I think, the waste that is generated, and historically there hasn't been a great long-term strategy for dealing with nuclear waste. Kind of, it's been of the let's dig a hole in the side of a mountain in Nevada and bury it there kind of variety.
What could go wrong? What could go wrong? We'll leave that for our friends in CityCast Las Vegas to deal with, right?
They'll probably run out of water before that becomes an issue. So,
love.
But what do we do in the long term with some of the consequences here? And, the worst case scenario of what if something goes wrong? That's why there's so much regulation in this space. It could take years. Yeah, Wisconsin's one nuclear power plant is in the process of being recertified. I think it started that process like 4 years ago. So it takes a while for good reason. One point I will make, though, is there's a hope with some of these newer, maybe like a smaller reactor or some of these newer technologies, that they're more stable and also that produces less waste. So, that's definitely an area that researchers are trying to kind of hone in on to make this a more viable technology moving forward.
Yeah, and it seems like some of that work and some of that research is being done here in Dane County. This another area of technology. I'm not going to put you on the spot testing your nuclear physics knowledge or anything like that, but another area of technology, nuclear fusion, which put very, very, very simply, forces two nuclei to combine and creates energy in the process. And as you write, this actually attempts to mirror how stars are fueled, which is kind of a fun way of thinking about it. Of course, fusion is still being developed, but there are folks here in Madison who are working on this. Like, what can you tell me about this budding industry here in Dane County?
Yeah, it is really interesting. And a lot of it has started at UW-Madison. The Cap Times had a really great in-depth story on nuclear fusion that folks should go read. But yes, the gentleman I quoted in my story, the CEO and co-founder of Rialta Fusion, is kind of one of the big firms around here making moves. And I think they're hopeful to maybe even be going beyond the prototype phase and in like a more solid development in the years to come. And also there's a firm in Janesville, and they're getting lots of investment. They're getting federal investment. So there is, I think, some credence to this idea of, well, maybe Madison can position itself to be a leader. Wisconsin can position itself to be a leader on this. You also have to remember, though, that there are lots of other communities across the country having that same thought. And, I mentioned briefly in the story, there are some states that are putting a lot of money into like tax breaks and incentives for firms researching nuclear technologies to locate there. So it's not just Wisconsin, but
Sure.
There are a lot of really interesting developments happening here locally as well that people maybe aren't aware of.
Sure. But you say tax breaks, I'm getting Foxconn flashbacks, and
I think they are building things there. So they're hopefully put some ahead of Foxconn.
Maybe it could be a new nuclear power plant facility. Who knows? Someone could explore that. So, for everyone who is working for this quote unquote nuclear energy moment, as we've stated, like this is really laying the groundwork for Wisconsin to be a hub for this type of energy. And as you've mentioned, like this is a story that has been in the works for years and will continue to take shape in the decades to come. But in the time that we are in now, what's next? Like, what will you be watching as this story progresses? Specifically, from the state government standpoint too.
Yeah, so I'll divide it actually into two different layers of government because I think there's also a federal component here that will be interesting to watch. Obviously, the Trump administration has a very different approach, I think, to energy than the Biden administration. That's pretty safe to say. But I think it's also possible for nuclear energy to be an area of agreement, kind of like it has been in Wisconsin. So I'll be interested to see kind of what Congress and what the Trump administration does here to see if they're going to be interested in helping states realize their nuclear energy moment. And in the legislature as well, bills get introduced all the time and things get proposed in the budget and, ideas get tossed out there. But it'll be interesting to see kind of what winds up becoming law, what winds up actually happening. And, I never make predictions in state government, but this does have the making of something that I think actually could happen and could get across the finish line. The state budget hopefully will be signed into law later this year. That would be probably a good place for people to kind of take stock of, did some of this that we talked about today, these big ideas that people have, did some of them kind of start to come into fruition?
All right, so there's a lot for us to watch here at the state level, at the local level, at the federal level. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming back on CityCast Madison. It is always a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Haley. Always fun to be here.
That's Andrew Ball, state government reporter at the Cap Times. To read his recent story on nuclear energy in Wisconsin, head to our show notes for a link. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm executive producer Haley Sperling. And if you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with someone who might not know how much energy it takes to store their 6,000 cat photos on the cloud? It's me. I'm that person. And don't go anywhere. In just a second, we've got a segment sponsored by Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin. I spoke with managing partner Sandy Botcher about financial planning and Northwestern's deep community involvement in the Madison area. Don't miss it. Hi, y'all. I am CityCast Madison executive producer Haley Sperling here with Sandy Botcher, the managing partner at Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin. Sandy, welcome to CityCast Madison. We're so happy to have you here today.
Haley, I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about what good financial planning can do.
Yeah, so let's kick it off. Can you give us just kind of like a quick overview of Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin and the services that y'all offer to your clients?
Northwestern Mutual is a holistic financial planning firm. We help clients protect the risks, the bad things that can happen, dying too early, becoming hurt and disabled, not being able to work, having a parent that you have to care for that takes time and money away from you planning for your own retirement. So we help think about protecting those risks so that we can help accumulate all the money that you need to live a long and healthy retirement. And so we really think about both the risk and the investments together to give you long-term financial security.
Yeah, and that's so important. And I love that you brought up the point that you're talking about it and you're thinking about things holistically. And I'm glad that you guys are here because I'm not a financial girly. I would love to be, unfortunately, but the numbers, they're just not my specialty. But thankfully, again, that's why you are here. And I know that Northwestern Mutual takes kind of a unique approach to financial planning. How would you describe that approach and what sets y'all apart from other advisory services out there?
It's funny that you bring up the numbers because the numbers are the last thing we talk to you about when we sit down to have a conversation. We really want to get to know what's important to you and your family, the hopes, the goals, the dreams, how you want to live your life today and how you want to live it into the future. And then we put together a plan that helps you think about how you're going to move along on that journey We are really in the business of building long-term relationships. Our clients are with us 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Wow.
Life's needs change along that journey, and the plan has to adjust and take into account all of the things that happen. And so that plan is the important part. And again, it starts with, we think about risks and how to take care of risks. And then we think about how to grow the assets in partnership. And when it's a beautiful partnership and combination.
I love that. Partnership, a lifetime experience. And it seems like you really build a sort of community with your clients and with the folks that you work with. And, here on CityCast Madison, we're all about local community. And I know that Northwestern Mutual is really involved in the greater Wisconsin community as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that your team is passionate about and why community engagement is such a big part of your mission?
Yeah. How much time do you have, Haley? Because I can get pretty revved up on this topic. At Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin, our mission is to help give people the freedom to live by design. That's the clients that we serve. That's the people who come and build their businesses and grow their careers in our firm. And then it's the community that we get to be a part of. And for us, one of the things that we are passionate about is raising dollars to help find a cure for pediatric cancer. We do that in partnership with a national organization known as Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. And I will tell you the work that we get to do to try to find money for research, little known fact, but the most prevalent cause of childhood death is cancer. And yet only 4% of the national funding goes to research for finding cures for pediatric cancer. That's why we are so passionate. And lots of things will disrupt a family, but a family with a child with cancer is disrupted both emotionally and financially. And so we're passionate about raising dollars for cure.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That sounds like an amazing cause, an amazing initiative that y'all are a part of. And that's just such a beautiful thing to contribute to the community in that way.
I love the fact that the fundraising we do in partnership with Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation ends up right here in our backyard in Madison. A lot of the dollars have made their way over to Carbone, where they're doing great things in terms of the pediatric cancer research that they're doing there. I'm delighted to be a part of the advisory board, helping Carbone think about furthering their mission and helping to raise funds for their great mission. So it's a beautiful way to make sure that we're giving back right here locally.
We love it. Local tie-ins all around. And you couldn't name a better cause, truly. Sandy, thank you so much for being with us here today. And for folks who want to learn more about Northwestern Mutual and their services, where can people find y'all?
Well, you can go to Northwestern Mutual Southern Wisconsin, find our website. You can find our Facebook page, and feel free to reach out and we can help connect you with someone who can help whatever you need.
Awesome. Sandy Bottard, thanks again for being here. And again, check out that website. That is southernwi.nm.com to learn more. And we'll have that link live for you in our show notes as well. So you're just one click away from finding out more. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.